It looks like the days of the almighty dollar could be coming to an end. And as the currency weakens, countries are looking for alternatives. And it looks like the euro also has a bleak future. Economists are pointing to a weakening U.S. and EU economy while emerging economies are growing. China, for example, is expected to trump the U.S. GDP in just a few years. And just last week at the BRICS summit in India, the 5 most rapidly growing countries agreed to ditch the dollar and trade using their own currencies. So has the dollar seen its day? And is the euro going down with it? Well, Michael Snyder, founder of the economiccollapseblog.com, is here to discuss more. Welcome, Michael. So what are the signs that the dollar is weakening? What signs are we seeing today?
Well, a lot of nations around the world are getting tired of using the U.S. dollar as essentially the de facto currency of the world for the past 4 decades. Essentially, U.S. dollar has been used in most international trade transactions, and in particular in the trade for oil. Back in 1973, the United States made an agreement with Saudi Arabia to do all trade in U.S. dollars, and that's greatly benefited the United States. But recently, we've seen, particularly some of these emerging countries that you've talked about, they've stood up and say, hey, why should the U.S. dollar continue to have such preeminence? For example, China. The IMF is projecting that China will have the largest economy in the world by the year 2016. So China is sitting there and they're asking, well, why shouldn't our currency have more of a place on the global stage? And so we've started to see a lot of these agreements come into place. For example, China and Russia have been trading with each other in their own currencies for over a year. And then just a few months ago, we saw China and Japan, the second and third largest economies on the globe, reach an agreement where they would start promoting the use of their own currencies and trade with one another. So we're starting to see a huge move away from the U.S. dollar.
And I also want to talk about the euro. The dollar is widely known as the world reserve currency, but it's not just the dollar necessarily that's slipping. Is the euro in danger too?
Oh, absolutely. But the euro, it's for different reasons. We see the problems in Greece, Portugal, Italy, Spain. Europe is really starting to crumble economically. And so that's the reason we're seeing the value of the euro go down. For a long time, people thought that the euro would be the primary rival of the dollar. But it's the financial problems, which are far from over. People need to realize that Europe is headed for some really, really hard times, and the euro is going to continue to decline in value. And we're going to see some of these emerging currencies become more widely used and more widely demanded.
Now, Michael, would you say that the euro is in more danger than the dollar?
Well, I think that you're looking at a couple different problems. We had this huge financial crisis back in 2008, which was centered on Wall Street. But now I believe that the next great financial crisis is going to be centered in Europe. In fact, we saw unemployment in Europe, in the Eurozone, go up to 10.8%. It's increased for 10 months in a row. They're heading into another tremendous recession. And there's a lack of confidence in the euro. We're going to see the value decline. Now, as far as the U.S. dollar, what we're seeing is the world wanting not to use it so much as a global trade currency. As I mentioned earlier, and then we're seeing other things. For example, China and Saudi Arabia recently came to this huge agreement where they would build this massive oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. And most people don't realize that China actually buys more oil from Saudi Arabia today than the United States does. So China is becoming the most important customer to Saudi Arabia. So how long will Saudi Arabia stick to trading in only U.S. dollars if China is a more important customer for them?
Now, when we are talking about the dollar as a world reserve currency coming to an end, what then would replace it?
Well, that's a good question. China is saying, hey, what about our currency? Or we've seen other proposals by the IMF or the United Nations talking about a basket of currencies, or ultimately a new global currency, which would be a truly global currency. So there's all kinds of proposals out there. So we're just going to have to see how it plays out. But ultimately, the people are talking about it. The United Nations, the IMF, they're putting out papers, they're putting out reports talking about the need to move away from the U.S. dollar. And then a big factor is that you look several decades ago, and around the world, the United States was greatly loved. But today, animosity toward the United States is rising, and that's also fueling part of this move away from the U.S. dollar, because people don't like the United States so much anymore. So they're questioning, well, why should we continue to use U.S. currency?
Now, we are seeing these signs, Michael, that the dollar is slipping, but it has been the standard reserve currency for quite some time. You mentioned China. How realistic is it that China's currency would be the alternative?
Well, China's very much promoting this. Like I said, they're about to become the largest economy in the world in just a few years. And for example, China is making all sorts of agreements in Africa and promoting the use of Chinese currency throughout the African continent. So there's been all kinds of newspapers articles about this lately. And meanwhile, the United States seems to be pulling back. And then also you see China recently made an agreement with the United Arab Emirates to trade oil in Chinese currency instead of United States dollars. So China's being very aggressive in this regard. So, we're definitely seeing a shift, a paradigm shift take place.
Now, Michael, when would this shift happen if it were to happen?
Well, it is probably going to play out over time, over a period of time. Now, what could accelerate that is a loss of confidence in the U.S. dollar and in U.S. debt. And a big thing that could cause that is we're seeing the U.S. budget deficit absolutely explode. It's over $15.5 trillion. Just since Barack Obama has been in office, it's risen by about $5 trillion more. And Federal Reserve, with quantitative easing, has been printing money and expanding the money supply. And the rest of the world is seeing this, and they're saying, whoa, that's not a stable currency. And that's part of the reason they're saying, well, maybe we need to move away from the dollar, because the dollar is not stable anymore. They're playing games with the dollar. The United States government's running up tremendous amounts of debt. So the rest of the world sees this, and they're saying, hey, maybe it's time for an alternative.
So this is all happening. Economists are talking about it. But I want to ask you, so what? Why should the average American care? What are the implications of all of this for the average citizen?
Well, because the U.S. dollar has been used in oil trade and international trade all these years, it's created a tremendous demand for dollars all over the world. Foreign governments have had to stockpile extra dollars to trade in to buy oil with. But if that changes, then all of a sudden the demand for dollars and the demands for U.S. government debt will fall dramatically. That means the value of the dollar will decline, and we'll see inflation here in the United States. The price of gasoline, the price of the things you buy in the stores, all that will go up. So average Americans will very much feel it when we see a huge move away from the U.S. dollar.
And with gas prices as high as they are right now, I have a feeling that Americans would not want them to go any higher. So this would be disastrous for the prices at the pump, it sounds like. Hopefully it doesn't go there. Michael, thank you for coming on the show. That was Michael Snyder, founder of the economiccollapseblog.com.